What's up y'all, Indominus B here, and before we get into the video I want to state real quick that this is part 2 in an ongoing series where we're looking at the history of 2D Sonic. So if you missed part 1, I'll make sure to drop the link to that down in the description. In this series I'm covering the history of 2D Sonic games, the classic speed-based platforming style, all the way from its inception up to current times. So don't miss out. Without further ado, this is a brief history of 2D Sonic in the 90s, part 2. For the next game we're looking at, we're going to head back over to the Game Gear for Sonic Chaos. As mentioned before, Sonic Chaos released the same day as Sonic CD, November 23rd, 1993. Chaos was made by the same devs who brought us the 8-bit Sonic 2. So the team had experience working with the series. And yeah, the same Game Gear Sonic 2 that left me traumatized from its obnoxious difficulty. Fortunately, you don't have to worry about that here. Sonic Chaos is much easier. In fact, so much easier that reviews looking at it in retrospect say it's a little too easy and claim its difficulty is a flaw. What do I say to that? Hogwash, come on, what's wrong with you? Does every game have to be Ghosts and Goblins hard? Besides, if you want a difficult Sonic game, I can point you in the right direction.
Hello there.
Seriously though, I find it to be a nice change of pace. A classic Sonic game you can just pick up and play through in a few hours without having too much trouble. I also want to add that this was the first 8-bit Sonic game to let you play as Tails, allowing players to go through the entire game as the two-tailed fox. Another new feature here for the 8-bit entries is the spin dash, which works pretty much identical to its 16-bit version in Sonic 2. While both playing as Tails and using the spin dash weren't necessarily new to the series here, this was the first time either feature was in a Game Gear or Master System Sonic game. However, there was something entirely new to the series here. Sonic Chaos was actually the first game to introduce Tails' flying ability, which was not present in Sonic 2. If you've ever played as Tails in a Sonic game after Sonic 3, then you're probably aware of this ability, but it actually controls differently here than what you may be used to. In Sonic Chaos, when standing still, the player needs to hold up on the D-pad and then press the jump button. This will have Tails fly straight up until he's run out of stamina. If you want to move in a specific direction while in air, well then simply hold the D-pad in that direction. A detail that all you legendary gamers have most likely picked up on just from looking at the gameplay here is how much the graphics in Sonic Chaos have been improved over previous 8-bit Sonic entries, with environments having a higher level of detail and Sonic's sprite being different. I would say the sprite here is an improvement, though I could also see why some may still prefer the Sonic 2 sprite. Aside from graphical improvements, Sonic Chaos runs better in general than its predecessor, with a smoother frame rate, and thanks to level design that allows the player to run for longer periods of time without stopping, Sonic Chaos is just a faster game overall. Some fans may be happy to hear that the super pill out from Sonic CD is also present, so gotta go fast. The story here is that the old evildoer Robotnik is up to his usual shenanigans, and has stolen a Chaos Emerald, wreaking havoc and causing South Island to begin falling into the ocean. Sonic and Tails must collect the other Chaos Emeralds which have been thrown into alternate dimensions, and return them to where they belong. Fun fact, Sonic Chaos is the first completely original Sonic game for the Game Gear, not sharing any levels, title, or plot with the Genesis Sonic. Of the 3 8-bit Sonic games I've covered up to this point, I would recommend Chaos way above the first 2 games. This is by far one of my favorite Game Gear games. Sonic Chaos also had a Master System release, however, like with Sonic 2, it did not come out in North America. If you have access to the Master System version though, then it's the one I recommend playing for the larger screen size and higher resolution. Well, we made it here. To my personal favorite Sonic game from the 90s and my favorite 2D Sonic game of all time. Released on February 2nd, 1994, Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Sonic 3 went through several development changes, so allow me to give a little insight into this. Development started shortly after Sonic 2's release. The California-based Sega Technical Institute, the devs behind Sonic 2, split into 2 teams. Essentially, one of Japanese developers and the other made up of American developers. The Japanese team would handle Sonic 3. A newcomer to this team was a man by the name of Takashi Iizuka, who stuck around to work on tons of future Sonic titles and is currently the head of Sonic Team. Sonic 3 initially started out under the title Sonic 3D, using an isometric camera angle. This may seem familiar, and that's because in 1996, Sega released Sonic 3D Blast, which also used an isometric camera angle. Safe to assume the idea for that game originated here. During development, the 3D title was scrapped and Sonic 3 was changed to a traditional 2D Sonic game. Sonic 3 was a large project, so large in fact that due to cartridge cost and time, it had to be split in two. We'll get to more on that in a little while. Typically, Sonic games are light on story, at least back in the 90s, as most platformers were back then. And don't get me wrong, Sonic 3 certainly isn't a Final Fantasy VI, but they definitely tell more of a story here than previous entries. Upon starting the game, you're hit with an in-game cutscene showing Sonic and Tails flying over the ocean on Tails' plane, the Tornado. Sonic then jumps off, turns into Super Sonic, flying onto the island. As soon as the Hedgehog arrives, he's ambushed by Knuckles the Echidna, the guardian of Angel Island and its Master Emerald. Knuckles takes the Chaos Emeralds from Sonic and then runs off. This is where the player takes over. The whole reason that Sonic and Tails have made their way to Angel Island in the first place is because after the events of Sonic 2, the Death Egg crashed into the floating island, throwing it into the ocean. Sonic and Tails are here to investigate, but unbeknownst to them, Robotnik has already met Knuckles upon crashing and tricked him into thinking Sonic is there to steal the Master Emerald, giving Robotnik plenty of time to harness the Emerald's power and restore the Death Egg. Throughout the game, the player will run into different traps Knuckles has set. Sonic 3 is the first Genesis Sonic title to feature a save system, not including Sonic CD since that game is only playable on the Sega CD add-on and not just a Genesis. The save system is such a welcomed addition, as having to restart the entire game was the majority of Sonic 1 and 2's difficulty. Like in Sonic 2, users can choose to play as either Sonic and Tails together, or Sonic or Tails alone. Sonic 3 brought with it new abilities. Tails now has the ability to fly, a first on the Genesis. Simply jump and continue tapping that jump button until Tails is out of stamina. Tails can also swim here by doing these same inputs while underwater. Let me go ahead and tell you, this ability is about as clutch as it gets. And the Blue Blur gets a couple of new abilities here himself. New to this game is the elemental shields. We have fire, electric, and water, and each grants us unique abilities. Fire makes you invulnerable to fire attacks. The electric shield makes you invulnerable to certain projectiles and automatically pulls rings towards you once within a certain range. And lastly, the water shield allows you to not run out of oxygen underwater. Yeah, pretty sweet. Both characters can use these shields, but Sonic can utilize them a little further. With the fire shield, the player can do a dash in air by pressing the jump button a second time. This doubles as an attack. The electric shield grants a double jump, and the water shield allows the player to bounce off the ground continuously and reach higher areas. These extra abilities are Sonic only. Even without the shields, Sonic has a new ability that can be performed by hitting the jump button a second time while in air that allows him to make a slightly ranged attack, and if timed correctly, can even reflect certain projectiles. Oh yeah, Sonic 3 came out swinging, and it doesn't let up there, throwing some more haymakers with graphics and presentation. And you won't have to wait long to see this either. From the moment you fire the game up and get to the title, you're immediately hit with a 3D model of Sonic. Then upon starting a save file, you see Sonic has a brand new look, with his sprite being completely different than previous outings. Just one of the many details that make Sonic 3 my favorite Genesis game. Once you've reached the midway point of the first level, one of Robotnik's minions appear on screen and begins firing off bombs, setting Angel Island on fire. Then, you play through the rest of Act 1 with the environment ablaze. From the title screen, to the Supersonic intro, to Sonic's new sprite, and the scenery drastically changing on the first level, the devs wasted no time in letting the player know Sonic's newest adventure is going to be his biggest yet. More examples of this is the neat 3D look sprites have during certain animations, or how well the background is layered in Hydro City, really giving the impression you're surfacing or diving into water. It may seem to some like I'm just letting my bias fly unchecked, but I don't feel that anything I've said is out of pocket. You can see that the devs really attempted to make their most ambitious project to date, and their hard work paid off. While Sonic 3 didn't sell as much as the first two games, it still managed to land a spot in the top 5 best-selling Genesis games of all time. Saying all of this actually leads us directly to the next game on our list. Remember how Sonic 3 was such an ambitious project that it had to be split in two? Enter Sonic and Knuckles. Originally planned as one single game, Sonic & Knuckles was split from Sonic 3 and made its own game due to time constraints, needing Sonic 3 out by a certain date. This restricted the devs from being able to fully complete the game by launch. The other reason it released as its own game is cartridge limitations. Sonic & Knuckles launched on October 18, 1994, and despite having to be released separately, Sega managed to tie the games together in a couple of ways. The first of these is that Sonic & Knuckles takes place immediately after the end of Sonic 3, after Sonic prevents the Death Egg from launching into space. In an honestly kinda comical turn of events, the Death Egg once again crashes onto Angel Island, but this time into the volcano. After jumping from the Death Egg, Sonic is caught by a strong gust of wind and lands in Mushroom Hill Zone. This is where the player takes control. Sonic & Knuckles is tied to Sonic 3 beyond just story though, with the game releasing on a special cartridge with lock-on technology. The game cartridge had an adapter on top of it that you could connect other Sega Genesis cartridges to. Connecting most random Genesis games to Sonic & Knuckles would allow you to play the Blue Sphere game. Connecting Sonic 2 to the cart let you play through that entire game as Knuckles, but connecting Sonic 3 to Sonic & Knuckles was the big one. This would turn the game into Sonic 3 and Knuckles, appropriately named, allowing players to play through the entirety of Sonic 3 as Knuckles. If these carts are connected, regardless of which character you choose, the stories are connected. As soon as you finish the main story in Sonic 3, it immediately takes you to the beginning of Sonic & Knuckles, having you play through both games seamlessly, as the developers originally intended. Now, by itself, Sonic & Knuckles does not feature a save system, but when connected to Sonic 3, it allows saves just as the game usually would. This game has you doing your usual Sonic thing, collecting emeralds and stopping Robotnik. I won't spoil the story, but I will tell you Sonic & Knuckles has some of the most interesting zones the series has to offer. Like Sandopolis Zone, where Act 1 has the player traversing a blazing hot desert, eventually finding a pyramid hidden beneath the sand. Act 2 has you exploring this dark and mysterious pyramid. Or how about the Hidden Palace Zone, where the Master Emerald is kept, and Sonic & Knuckles have their showdown. As far as gameplay mechanics and graphics, nothing really changed here since Sonic 3. You know, since they were the same game and all. A fancy new addition here is the Super Emeralds. To collect these, it is required that you have Sonic 3 connected to Sonic & Knuckles, and you collect the Super Emeralds by clearing the special stages in Sonic & Knuckles. The first one is acquired in Mushroom Hill Zone after this cutscene showing Knuckles leaving, looking a little suspicious. Sonic hops in the Super Ring and is warped to the Hidden Palace. Collecting all 7 grants you the power to become Hyper Sonic, Super Tails, or Hyper Knuckles depending on who you're playing as. If you enjoy Sonic's classic games on the Genesis, then you'll definitely have fun with Sonic & Knuckles. But if you do have the means, then I highly suggest playing it as it was intended. For the full story, extra features, and ability to save, this game is best played as Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Next up, we're going back to the Blue Blur in 8-bit. In November of 1994, Sega released Sonic Triple Trouble for the Sega Game Gear. Like the last two 8-bit titles, Triple Trouble was developed by Aspect. Unlike the other 8-bit games we've covered, Triple Trouble did not get a Master System release. While there hadn't been a Sonic game on Sega's 8-bit home console in North America since the first game, both Sonic 2 and Chaos had Master System ports in other regions. However, Sonic Triple Trouble would be exclusive to the handheld. Triple Trouble is a sequel to Sonic Chaos and is the first game to feature Knack the Weasel, also known as Fang the Sniper. I got you, Sonic the Fighters fans. The game was also the first 8-bit Sonic title to feature Knuckles the Echidna. The story, while sharing small details with Sonic 3, is its own game. Robotnik, up to his usual stuff, is once again after the Chaos Emeralds. He already attained 6 of them, but in classic Robotnik fashion, manages to screw up his own plans by scattering 5 of the emeralds while testing a new weapon, only holding on to the yellow emerald now. Sonic and Tails, both playable characters in Triple Trouble, learn of the Doctor's plan and set out to stop it. Once again, Robotnik tricks Knuckles, this time into thinking that Sonic is after the Chaos Emeralds for world domination. Look, Knuckles is my guy. I mean, that's my favorite character, so I'm not saying he's dumb, but he should really start working on who he trusts. Eventually, Sonic and Tails run across Knuckles and the pair goes back and forth with the Echidna about the situation before going separate ways. Little did everyone know, the newcomer and treasure hunter, Knack the Weasel, had been listening in on the exchange and has already collected the other 5 emeralds. I don't want to spoil the entire story, but that should give you a good idea of what's going on here. Thanks to their experience with the Game Gear and Sonic, Aspect managed to improve the graphics once again, going beyond even the graphical improvements they pulled off in Sonic Chaos. Sonic's sprite in Triple Trouble is by far the best it's looked in any 8-bit title. Being a sequel to Chaos, All of the same abilities appear here, like Sonic's pill out and Tails flying, and both characters can spin dash as you would expect. Character exclusive power-ups also return, like Sonic's rocket shoes and pogo spring, as well as some new power-ups like jet boards and Tails exclusive hyper helitails, the Tails equivalent to the rocket shoes. There's no weird gameplay gimmicks here to catch you off guard. It's the classic Sonic formula we all know and love. And that's not a bad thing. It's what made the series what it is. And if it was wildly different, well, it at least wouldn't be in this video. Reviews at the time praised the graphics, but like the Game Gear title before it, said it was a little too easy. Some even criticized it for having too much slowdown. Though if I'm being honest, in my time with it, I didn't experience this problem. Or at least not enough to notice it or feel it was a hindrance. Time to shift to a new console for the series. Well, kinda. New because there technically hadn't been a Sonic game released here, but kinda because it still requires a Sega Genesis. The game in question, of course, Knuckles Chaotix. Released in April of 1995 for the Genesis add-on, the Sega 32X. For those that don't know, the 32X was released in late 1994 in North America, and like the other add-on, the Sega CD, required the Sega Genesis to function. The 32X was an adapter you would plug into the cartridge slot of your Genesis that also came with its own power supply. The bit craze was still going strong in 1994, and with the 32-bit Sony PlayStation on the horizon and Nintendo 64-bit N64 only 2 years away, Sega was looking to stay competitive, releasing the 32X as a 32-bit upgrade for the 16-bit console. The real problem here, Sega already had a 32-bit console releasing that same month. The Sega Saturn. Sega's decision-making in the 90s was dodgy and a rabbit hole so deep it would require its own video, and maybe I'll cover that one day, but for now, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context going forward. Knuckles Chaotix actually had a fairly troubled development. There was a lot that went on behind the scenes, but I'll try to summarize things. Created by an internal Sega team, including some people that worked on Sonic CD, Knuckles Chaotix started on the Genesis under the title Sonic Crackers. It would eventually move over to the Sega Saturn and was intended to be a mainline Sonic game, launching alongside the console. According to then Sega of America CEO Tom Kalinske, however, the game was too big, taking too long, over budgeted, and behind schedule. After realizing the game wouldn't be out in time for the Saturn, it was scaled back and development for it was moved over to the Sega 32X, under the new working title, Knuckles Ringstar. At this point, Sonic and Tails were removed from the project, and it was decided the Echidna himself, Knuckles, would be the star of the show. The game was now planned to be an early release title for the 32X. Obviously, the name would be changed one final time to Knuckles Chaotix before launch. Now let's get to the actual game itself. Knuckles Chaotix takes the classic speed-based platforming Sonic formula and adds a twist to it. And this has, ironically considering the twist, split fans down the middle. People either love Knuckles Chaotix or they hate it. There is no in-between. The new mechanic here is that you control two characters tethered to each other by these rings. You technically control the first character, but hold certain buttons to get the second character to perform certain actions, such as standing still. Depending on the scenario, this can help the player to activate switches or build momentum for the player to take off and reach new areas. It's also used during boss fights. While gameplay is centered around this mechanic, level design really isn't that different than other Sonic games at the time. Let's talk characters for a moment. Knuckles Chaotix has several the player can choose. Some new to the games, one who was previously only playable on the arcade game Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, and another who was just outright brand new to the series. Knuckles is obviously the main one. Then we also have Mighty the Armadillo from the Sega Sonic arcade game, Charmy B, who first appeared in a Sonic manga strip in 1992, Vector the Crocodile, who actually appeared in artwork for the first Sonic game, and Espio the Chameleon, who was completely new here. And yes, to my Sonic Heroes fans, this was the first time we've seen Team Chaotix together. There is technically two other robots that can be your second character, but let's just hope you don't get stuck with them. Each character has their own ability unique to them. Knuckles retains his ability to glide and climb walls. Mighty has a wall jump. Vector can dash through the air and climb walls. Charmy can fly and hover. And finally, Espio has the ability to run along walls and ceilings. You don't just get to select both of your characters. You can pick your main character when you load into the game each time. Oh yeah, this game has a save system. But for the second player, you have to play this crane game here and hopefully you can snag the one you're after. The area you do this at is kind of a hub world. You return here after each level and when loading your save file. This hub area is also where you randomly pick the next level you'd like to go to. Being that Knuckles Chaotix is on 32X, you may be curious if it really takes advantage of that extra power the add-on offers. Look, I'm no developer or an expert on the hardware, but there is some impressive stuff going on here. The intro and title screen offer you some nice cutscenes and cool 3D effects. There's also a lot of sprite scaling and rotating you'll encounter throughout the game as well. Graphics are also looking pretty crisp here. Knuckles' sprite is very much improved, with new animations to go with it. Could the Genesis have handled this game alone? Maybe, but that's debatable, and I'm not convinced it could. I'll give a brief rundown of the story before some final thoughts. Sometime after Angel Island crashed into the ocean in Sonic 3, it created an odd island in the South Sea thanks to the Master Emerald's energy. This new island constantly changes appearances. Knuckles becomes curious of this island, naturally, and wonders if it once housed an ancient civilization. He heads off to investigate, but Robotnik has made it there first. Using an ancient technology known as the Chaos Rings, Robotnik is once again trying to conquer the world. Knuckles comes across Espio, and the two head off to New Trojik High Zone to stop the Doctor, where they also come across Mighty, Vector, and Charmy, who join them in their quest. Like mentioned earlier, fans are split on Knuckles Chaotix. You either love it or hate it. Me personally, I like it. Sue me.
Sue me for what?
It takes a second to get used to the tether controls, but after that it's fun, and plays like other Sonic games from back then, and its story is held together well by great cutscenes. It's known to be the last of the classic Sonic games, and I wish Sega would re-release it in some format so more people had the chance to experience it and form their own opinions. It's kinda the final chapter to that era of Sonic. Though the 90s did have one last traditional Sonic game to offer after this. Alright, time to head back over to a platform we've already been to several times. The Sega Game Gear. That's right, Sega's little 8-bit handheld that could. Aspect had been doing this here Sonic and Game Gear dance for a while, and this time they were about to take a page out of Donkey Kong's book and do something the series hadn't seen before. Sonic was going full pre-rendered. Sonic Blast released on November 14th of 1996 for the Sega Game Gear. It was later ported to the Master System in December of 1997, but that version only released in Brazil. Still, even being a regional exclusive, it's kind of crazy to think it launched at the end of 1997 on a console whose lifespan started all the way back in 1985. But anyways, the Game Gear. For those that aren't aware, pre-rendered graphics are what games such as Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo used. It's where everything is rendered with 3D models and then those 3D models are turned into sprites. Back in the mid-90s, this technology was groundbreaking, giving games a much more detailed or realistic look. An even better comparison here would actually be Donkey Kong Land, which launched on the Game Gear's rival, the Game Boy, 1 year prior. It was successful and showed that pre-rendered visuals could work on an 8-bit handheld. So how well would Sonic pull this off? I'll go ahead and let you know this game is not loved the way Donkey Kong's outing is. Graphically, I think it looks great. In fact, I would even say it's quite impressive considering the hardware. But critics didn't care about impressive, and some even claim the visuals ruined the game. I find that to be a bit dramatic. And like I said, I personally think it looks great. The other gripe is the speed of the game, and that's a claim I won't try to argue. Sonic is supposed to be fast, that's kind of his thing. And I'm not gonna lie, you're not as fast here as his other Game Gear games. I don't necessarily think this was by choice though, more so hardware limitations. But acceleration is much slower in Sonic Blast. Another complaint is linearity. Most Sonic games have multiple routes you can take to get to the finish line, and that's not really present in this game. And that pretty much covers most of the complaints you'll usually see about Sonic Blast, so now let's take a look over the story and gameplay. Story's pretty simple, even by Sonic standards. Robotnik, being the absolute crack shot that he is, hits a Chaos Emerald on accident while aiming for Sonic and shatters it. I mean, seriously, this guy would get turned down by the Empire, and we all know those steady hand stormtroopers are known for. After this, Sonic then teams up with Knuckles to explore South Island in pursuit of the pieces to the Chaos Emeralds and get them before Robotnik does. As you could guess, the two playable characters here are Sonic and Knuckles, both retaining their abilities from Sonic 3, except Sonic can double jump without the electric shield, but Knuckles still glides and climbs with no changes. Sonic Blast did continue the 8-bit trend that started with Sonic Chaos, and that's the game being easy. Easier than what you're used to at least. So that pretty much sums up Sonic Blast. There's not really all that much to talk about here. It's definitely not for everyone, but is it as terrible as reviews lead you to believe? Absolutely not. If you enjoy the 2D Sonic games, I implore you to try this one out for yourself and form your own opinion. If nothing else, play it for the historical value. This was the end of an era, the 1990s, way past cool, classic Sonic. It would be several years before Sonic would return to this style of gameplay, and when the blue blur would make his 2D comeback, it would be in brand new fashion. The dawn of a new era. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to drop a like and subscribe for future content. As mentioned in the beginning of this video, this is part 2 in an ongoing series, so check out part 1, the link is in the description, and make sure to stick around for future videos. If you're hankering for some more Sonic content, maybe check out this video on screen, or if you're looking for something else entirely, maybe check out one of these 3. Until next time, Indominus out.